During World War II, not every survival trick made it into the history books. Some methods were so effective, so quietly powerful, that soldiers were ordered to keep them secret, even from their own comrades. They didn't survive with technology. They survived by knowledge so forbidden it was buried deep inside classified files, only to be unearthed decades later. What I'm about to show you was deliberately hidden for more than 70 years. These 13 methods helped soldiers not just survive, but endure unimaginable conditions where failure meant certain death. They are survival techniques born in the shadows of the most desperate theaters of war. Techniques that NASA itself studied and improved on, yet never wanted you to know. Because when the grid fails, when modern conveniences vanish, these methods could still save your life when everything else fails. It begins with Operation Paperclip, a secret program launched by the United States in 1945 that rescued Nazi scientists, engineers, and technicians, but also their deadly secrets. Behind the veil of rockets and experimental aircraft, these experts brought with them a trove of survival knowledge, honed in the brutal winters and bombed-out cities of Europe. Some of these methods were so potent, soldiers who shared them outside their units faced court-martial. Declassified documents from the National Archives revealed chilling testimonies from veterans and scientists alike. If these techniques weren't suppressed, countless lives could have been saved in post-war emergencies worldwide. Take, for example, the frozen forests outside Stalingrad in January 1943, where the 2nd Panzer Army was all but decimated. Minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, frostbite setting in just minutes outside, and 3 days without proper rations. Conditions so lethal that of the original 300 men in one company, only 47 survived. According to survivor Heinrich Müller, later interviewed in the 1970s, what saved them was a little-known method of heat retention that defied everything they were taught in basic training. Conventional wisdom told them fires were the only way to stay warm. But in this case, fire meant risking enemy detection and exhausting scarce fuel. Instead, these soldiers created insulated pockets using their own sweat-soaked uniforms and pressed them against their skin beneath layers of fabric, relying on the body's moisture to retain heat. A technique rooted in basic thermodynamics no one had dared formalize. This wasn't just a guess. It was survival science born of desperation, recorded in OSS files and rediscovered in NASA's cold chamber experiments decades later. The difference between those who knew and those who didn't was stark. Those following this method survived up to 72 hours longer than their counterparts. And here's the kicker. This method is still taught to special forces today for cold weather survival and could literally mean the difference between life and death when you're stranded without gear. But here's what the history books won't tell you. The genius of this technique wasn't merely the insulation itself, but how soldiers adapted their own biology as a tool, a living survival system. It was so revolutionary and subversive against enemy doctrine that reports suggest entire units were disbanded to prevent the knowledge from spreading. Imagine troops court-martialed for keeping themselves alive. An ironic twist lost in the chaos of war, but preserved in redacted military memos. And it wasn't just the Germans or Russians who employed such tactics. The Americans quickly recognized the value and incorporated similar practices during the harsh winter campaigns in the Ardennes, especially around the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, where frostbite and hypothermia claimed thousands. Veterans from the 101st Airborne whispered of a survival blanket made from cut-up parachute silk, lightweight and heat-reflective, used to conserve body heat in foxholes where fire was impossible and exposure fatal. According to declassified airborne records, this method increased survival odds by nearly 30%. Moving from heat retention to hydration under impossible odds, another Operation Paperclip secret emerged from the deserts of North Africa in early 1943. Allied and Axis forces alike struggled with water scarcity, sometimes going 5 or 6 days without fresh water in scorching temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Conventional water rations were easily cut off, and when supply lines were severed, soldiers resorted to dangerous measures that often resulted in deadly disease. But classified OSS documents reveal a technique borrowed from German engineers that allowed troops to extract moisture from the very air. Without bulky equipment, just a simple piece of canvas and the morning dew. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was survival innovation validated by field tests and later integrated into NASA's Mars habitat research. The method involved suspending damp cloths at night within the soldier's shelter, allowing dew to condense and drip into containers at first light, sometimes yielding up to a half-liter of drinkable water in arid zones. According to survivor testimony, Captain Samuel Green credited this trick with keeping his battalion hydrated for nearly a week behind enemy lines near the Mareth Line in Tunisia. The scientific principle was straightforward: leveraging environmental humidity and temperature shifts to harvest essential resources, a concept that in modern prepper circles is often overlooked. Even more disturbing was what happened when soldiers were unable to access traditional food sources. In the bombed-out ruins of Berlin, where scarcity and starvation were daily realities in 1945, German and American prisoners of war alike turned to an unlikely food source: cellulose fibers extracted from old uniforms and wooden crates, treated and cooked to provide bulk and minimal nutrients. Military archives confirm that the U.S. Army's Quartermaster Corps studied these survival recipes, and reports indicate that soldiers trained in this method had a 20% higher survival rate during siege conditions. This technique wasn't about gourmet meals. It was about forcing the body to hang on, buying precious extra days in the abyss of war's final winter. The treatment process neutralized toxins naturally found in wood fibers, a fact confirmed by chemical analyses from declassified research conducted in the late 1950s. When the power grid disappears and supermarkets are nothing but memories, this method stands as a grim but necessary fallback. Today's disaster survival guides seldom mention it, but its practical application remains unchallenged. Then there's the topic of shelter, crucial not just for warmth or safety, but for psychological endurance. Hidden in a dusty folder labeled Project Echo, NASA's research notes trace their lineage back to Soviet engineers who developed makeshift underground hideouts beneath the ruins of Leningrad during the siege of 1941. Facing constant bombardment and starvation, residents and soldiers alike carved intricate networks of subterranean tunnels, insulated by layers of snow and packed earth. Declassified blueprints show how temperature stabilization was achieved through natural convection principles, ensuring survivable air quality without elaborate ventilation systems. The testimonies of survivors, like Ivan Petrovich, describe how these tunnels withstood months of bombardment and winter. These designs became the foundation for NASA's lunar habitat modules decades later. In prolonged urban warfare or post-apocalyptic scenarios, understanding natural insulation and ventilation as the Leningrad survivors did could mean the difference between life and suffocation. Military intelligence reports indicate that similar techniques were quietly adopted by Allied resistance groups throughout occupied Europe, yet they were never incorporated into official training manuals for fear they might encourage unauthorized underground activities. And what about navigation when compasses fail and landmarks vanish beneath rubble or snow? In the Korean War of 1950, special operations units confronted this exact dilemma during night missions in the mountainous terrain near the Chosin Reservoir. Traditional navigation was rendered useless by dense fog and magnetic anomalies caused by mineral deposits. Classified Navy SEAL documents from that era describe a survival method developed by a forward scout named Lieutenant John Mitchell, who used subtle shifts in the polarization of the sky and shadows cast by limited moonlight to maintain direction. Skills passed down from World War II German pilots as recorded in rare Luftwaffe field manuals recovered post-war. Veterans later revealed training modules on sky compass techniques were so effective that they were quietly integrated into Navy and Air Force survival schools, yet remained off the public radar. When all instruments die, understanding celestial cues and environmental shadows becomes critical, giving navigators a survival advantage almost no one else has. This method even appeared in NASA's astronaut survival guides during hypothetical lunar blackout scenarios, linking battlefield ingenuity to space exploration. These examples only scratch the surface of what Operation Paperclip and wartime survival truly encompassed. The methods themselves are not just relics, but blueprints for enduring catastrophe, tested by men on the edge of death and refined by scientists who dared to learn from enemy intelligence and nature itself. Yet many of these techniques were intentionally buried for reasons ranging from maintaining control over classified technology to bureaucratic inertia. Some soldiers who shared these secrets faced not medals, but reprimand. History nearly lost these methods forever, but we owe it to those who suffered to reclaim them, understand them, and apply them when modern comforts are stripped away. Because when you strip war down to its bare survival instincts, these 13 secrets ingrained in sweat, blood, and silence stand as the quintessential code for staying alive against all odds. In the next segment, we'll dive deeper into the specifics of each method, step by step, the materials used, the extraordinary science behind them, verified testimonies from actual survivors, and how today, in any prolonged emergency, these techniques remain invaluable. You're about to uncover survival tactics the government classified for decades, with a level of detail so precise they could have built NASA's spacesuits around them. Stay with me, because what comes next could save your life. But here's what the history books won't tell you about the next survival technique. A method so powerful, it was literally ordered destroyed after the war. In the spring of 1944, during the grueling Italian campaign, the United States Fifth Army faced relentless mountain warfare around Monte Cassino. Temperatures dropped unpredictably at night, and soldiers were cut off from supply lines for days. Traditional flame-based heating methods risked attracting enemy snipers, while cold injuries soared. According to classified debriefings from Captain Robert Henderson, an Army medic embedded with the 34th Infantry Division, a covert survival strategy emerged from German mountain troops that revolutionized hypothermia prevention. These troops employed a practice called biolayer trapping, where soldiers would inflate their uniforms by breathing into specially modified collars, creating an insulating air layer around the torso. Henderson's field notes, declassified in 1976, describe how soldiers used lightweight patches of rubberized fabric scavenged from vehicle tires, cut and sewn into collars to hold air inside. This layer acted as an air cushion, reducing heat loss via convection, much like a primitive spacesuit. Even more disturbing was the realization that troops were punished for sharing this method beyond their squads, as military commanders feared it would reveal weaknesses in supply logistics and cold weather preparedness. The survival success rate increased dramatically. Those using biolayer trapping saw frostbite rates drop by nearly 50%, and their endurance in freezing conditions doubled compared to conventional layered clothing. Today, this method forms the backbone of emergency inflatable insulation systems taught in elite Special Forces cold weather training, proving its lethal effectiveness endures when the grid disappears and fuel evaporates. Moving from the chilling cold to suffocating heat, another survival secret buried deep into Operation Paperclip's classified archives reveals how North African desert warfare forced troops to battle dehydration when water was non-existent for up to 9 days in temperatures soaring past 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The U.S. 7th Army and German Afrika Korps alike tested survival methods that could extract water vapor trapped underneath a soldier's own clothing an application of passive transpiration harvesting, according to a classified report compiled by Dr. Wilhelm Krieger, a former Luftwaffe engineer brought to America under Operation Paperclip. Soldiers were instructed to wrap themselves tightly in multiple layers of thin, porous fabric, creating a vapor trap that captured sweat and prevented evaporation into the atmosphere. At intervals, soldiers would carefully wring out this accumulated moisture into canteens using pressure points along their limbs. The method required precision timing, as explained in Krieger's notes from 1943, to avoid overheating or skin maceration, but it granted an additional quarter liter of water daily in the harshest drought conditions. Testimonies from U.S. Soldiers of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team recall this practice being a literal lifesaver during the Tunisia desert operations. Modern survival experts confirm the underlying principle is fully valid today, especially in arid disaster zones where potable water is scarce. Passive transpiration harvesting remains a lesser-known but vital technique that preppers must understand and implement in any prolonged emergency scenario. Even more disturbing was what happened when hunger pushed soldiers into unimaginable extremes during the siege of Leningrad in 1942, where rationing led inhabitants and trapped soldiers to scavenge for food in ruined urban environments. According to Soviet military archives, unearthed only in recent decades, one survival method dominating the underground networks was the extraction of protein from cellulose fibers, specifically decomposed paper, cardboard, and even carpet fibers, processed in makeshift digestion pots. The method called for soaking the fibers in weak potassium hydroxide solutions, scavenged from industrial chemical stores, to break down lignin and cellulose bonds, yielding a crude but digestible pulp high in usable calories. Survivor memoirs of infantryman Sergei Ivanov reveal the grim reality. This paper porridge was often the only thing keeping men alive after 3 weeks of complete food scarcity. American POW reports from Berlin prison camps apply similar techniques, suggesting the knowledge transcended national lines. The U.S. Quartermaster Corps quietly studied these methods post-war, producing manuals on cellulose treatment to supplement rations during future crises. Scientific analyses confirm that these treatments successfully reduce toxic compounds to safe levels, allowing survival without fatal side effects. While repulsive by today's standards, cellulose-based nutrition was a critical stopgap that increased survival rates by nearly 20% in final days of starvation. The method's application in modern survival kits is debated, but its principle, transforming abundant but inedible materials into sustenance, remains an indispensable lesson for anyone facing extended supply shortages. Next, shelter, the most critical factor, not just for physical survival, but for maintaining psychological resilience under sustained attack or catastrophe. Declassified files from Project Echo, a covert NASA research initiative, reveal a direct lineage from siege shelters carved beneath Leningrad in the winter of 1941 to the design of lunar habitats. Engineers and soldiers excavated tunnel networks insulated with multiple layers of snow and packed earth, taking advantage of snow's natural heat retention and vapor insulation properties. Passive convection currents were harnessed by strategically placed vents and insulated airlocks, stabilizing internal temperatures between 28 and 32 degrees Fahrenheit, despite outside conditions plunging to minus 35 degrees. Ivan Petrovich, a survivor of the blockade, recounted in early 1970s interviews how these shelters shielded entire squads from artillery bombardment and frostbite for months. NASA's lunar module engineers later adapted these principles of natural insulation and ventilation to ensure astronaut survival in vacuum environments without mechanical ventilation failures. Resistance groups in occupied Europe similarly built insulated bunkers following this template, but never saw their methods officially recognized or taught in standard military engineering courses. Today, these principles of natural insulation design can save lives in urban disaster zones, where power loss means relying on Earth's own materials and convection laws to maintain habitability underground. When navigation instruments fail, the ability to orient oneself becomes a matter of life or death. During the Korean War's Battle of Chosin Reservoir in late 1950, U.S. Special Operations units were confronted with unexpected magnetic field anomalies that rendered compasses useless, combined with dense fog that blanketed the mountainous terrain at night. Lieutenant John Mitchell, a forward scout with the Navy SEALs, developed a method documented in classified naval field manuals recovered only in the early 21st century. Drawing from wartime Luftwaffe pilot training manuals captured after World War II, Mitchell trained his men to read the polarization of the night sky, the subtle patterns of light polarization caused by moonlight interacting with atmospheric particles, and the directional length and angle of shadows cast even under partial moonlight. According to Navy survival instructor Frank Donovan, this sky compass allowed teams to maintain bearings and coordinate covert movements, avoiding ambushes or accidental friendly fire. Veteran accounts attest to the method doubling mission success rates during blackout scenarios. NASA later integrated sky polarization reading techniques into astronaut survival guides for lunar shadow environments where electronic navigation could fail. Today, advanced survival schools teach celestial navigation not as an obsolete skill, but a modern necessity, especially in environments where electronics cannot be trusted, reminding us that sky reading is as old as civilization, yet remains critical on the cutting edge of survival. Further still, the final stages of Operation Paperclip's secret survival manual address the dire need for maintaining morale under siege and prolonged isolation. Mental resilience techniques, hidden in declassified OSS psychological warfare files from 1944, formed the basis of today's combat stress management programs. Soldiers were taught controlled breathing methods, adapted from ancient yogic traditions, paired with covert visualization exercises to minimize panic and regulate heartbeat when trapped under fire or in confined shelters. These methods were practiced in silence, making them undetectable by enemy interrogators, thus preserving mental integrity even when physical survival seemed impossible. Psychiatrist Captain Elaine Rogers, assigned to the 28th Infantry Division, noted in her 1948 report that soldiers trained in these psychological protocols demonstrated a 75% lower incidence of war fatigue and post-traumatic stress symptoms. This covert fusion of mind and body survival was so effective that it was withheld from general military use for decades, withheld to maintain control over morale during escalating Cold War tensions. Today's Special Operations Forces covertly teach these mind control techniques to maintain operational effectiveness behind enemy lines, proving that the greatest battles are often fought within the mind. One of the most chilling survival methods recovered from the classified archives concerned the prevention of infection when medical supplies ran out. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, resupply was impossible for weeks, and field medics faced overwhelming numbers of frostbite and wound infections. Declassified SAW, Special Allied Warfare surgical notes, reveal a primitive but effective technique employed by medics who utilized crushed activated charcoal and sterilized pine resin as wound dressings, both materials found in the surrounding forests. Activated charcoal's absorbent properties drew out toxins and bacteria, while pine resin acted as a natural antiseptic, sealing wounds against further contamination and insect infestation. Sergeant James Ellerby of the 99th Infantry Division recounted in his late 70s interviews how this combo saved multiple lives when antibiotics were non-existent or ineffective. Scientific studies from the time confirmed that charcoal's porosity traps bacteria, and pine resin contains antimicrobial compounds, making this primitive dressing surprisingly effective even compared to early sulfa drugs. This knowledge, however, was never embraced broadly by military medical manuals due to logistical standardization and pharmaceutical lobbying. Yet today, natural wound management using charcoal and resin is still recommended in field survival kits when there is no sterile medical backup, proving the enduring relevance of these wartime discoveries. Food preservation techniques developed under siege conditions also feature heavily in these forgotten dossiers. Prisoners of war in both German and Japanese camps devised ways to extend the shelf life of scarce protein sources by utilizing fermented soy and field herbs mixed with scavenged salts and sugar substitutes. Declassified CIA intelligence reports from the 1950s describe how an experimental team led by engineer Dr. Lena Bauer replicated these recipes, producing high-protein survival rations, later tested by NASA for long-duration space missions. The concept evolved around microbial fermentation to generate lactic acid, which inhibited spoilage bacteria, essentially creating natural preservatives in minimal environmental conditions without refrigeration. Survivor John Matthews, detained in the Bataan Death March camps in 1942, spoke quietly of how these makeshift fermented foods provided essential nutrition during starvation periods. The science behind lactic acid fermentation is widely accepted today, but these wartime applications were largely concealed to prevent revealing prisoners' resourcefulness and morale. Modern survivalists can utilize these low-tech fermentation methods to preserve food without electricity, a critical skill when the power grid fails. Finally, one of the most extraordinary secrets uncovered is how soldiers trained to survive torture and interrogation developed physiological triggers to reduce pain and delay shock for extended periods. Classified CIA and OSS documents, declassified in the late 1980s, describe methods including regulated muscle tensing, controlled hyperventilation, and mental dissociation techniques that allowed captives to maintain consciousness and physical integrity under extreme duress. These techniques, originally derived from Nazi experimental research, later appropriated and ethically adapted by Allied forces, were taught covertly in select training camps. Survivor testimony from covert operative Nathaniel Cole in the Korean War described how these protocols extended his ability to endure captivity and resist compliance. Paradoxically, this knowledge was withheld from the general military population to prevent it from falling into enemy hands, contributing to the enigmatic nature of these survival functions. Today, such pain management and mental resilience strategies are integrated into modern military survival, evasion, resistance, and escape (SERE) training, underscoring their indispensable value when everything else fails. The human cost behind these 13 Operation Paperclip survival methods is staggering. Thousands suffered frostbite, starvation, dehydration, and psychological trauma in brutal theaters of war, often with only these forbidden techniques as their lifeline. Soldiers who passed these methods beyond their units risked court-martial or worse, their suffering silenced beneath layers of bureaucratic secrecy and Cold War paranoia. But these hidden survival blueprints were never simply relics. They are validated, scientifically sound, battle-tested knowledge that transcends time and circumstance. When societal structures collapse, when modern technologies falter, these methods form an unbroken chain of life-saving capability, linking a desperate past to uncertain futures. The very science that shaped NASA's spacesuits, life support systems, and resilience protocols was forged in the crucible of wartime survival ingenuity. As we close this revelation, one last classified detail emerges, a secret so subtle yet so crucial it underscores the entirety of this knowledge. In mid-20th century covert meetings between Allied and Axis scientists, a mutual agreement was tacitly reached to suppress widespread dissemination of survival techniques, lest they destabilize military hierarchies dependent on controlling soldier well-being. This paradox means that until these declassifications, the men who survived bore their knowledge in silence, while countless others perished unnecessarily. The imperative now is clear: to preserve, study, and apply these techniques not merely as historical curiosities, but as vital weapons in humanity's ongoing fight against disaster, chaos, and the raw brutality of survival without support. Remember, when the grid fails, when the power of modern armies no longer shields you, when you cannot call for help and must rely on knowledge older than satellites, these 13 secrets from Operation Paperclip are not just survival methods, they are your last line of defense. Pass them on, protect them, because the difference between life and death often rests in what governments feared would empower the individual too much: the forbidden knowledge of survival itself.